Sponsored by Taylor Freelance, Rainier Ballistics, Hodgdon Powders, and JPL Precision.
Hey Power Factor fans, I'm Rick and I'm here at the Power Factor studio on the road, and we're going to talk about a stage that was at the IDPA match at my club a couple of weeks ago. And it was kind of it started out as sort of controversial, and there's quite a bit of discussion about it. And then even after the match, the discussion continued. And it was an interesting enough stage that I thought I'd talk about the implications of all of the little aspects of it, and how I think the current rules apply. And it was a very short stage. You started standing immediately in front of the target labeled T1, gun holstered, and you would, as you retreated from T1, engage it with 6 rounds on the way to a Bianchi barricade that was about 15, 20 feet up range from the start position, and the barricade is labeled P2 on the procedure. And then there are a couple of stacks of barrels that block your view of 2 targets that will be engaged on the move, surprise appearing targets that will be engaged on the move after you've left P2 on the way to P3. And then when you arrive at P3, there's a last target to be engaged from the cover of P3. So 6 rounds on the first target, 2 on each of the last 3. Now the thing that was interesting about it is that the stage designer, his comment was, I wanted to give the shooter choices. And that was the whole idea, is that everybody didn't have to run it the same way. Now, if you were a revolver shooter, you'd fire your 6 shots on the move, backing up to P2. You'd arrive at P2 with an empty gun. The cover of P2 would provide a place to reload. Then you'd reload and advance towards P3. Your movement would reveal T2 and T3 to be engaged while moving. Arrive at P3 to engage the last target, T4, using the cover of P3. Now, if you were shooting in any other division, after you had fired your 6 rounds at T1, you would arrive at approximately the P2 position with rounds still in your gun. Now, you would need 4 rounds to complete the on-the-move part of the engagement on your way to T3. But, of course, the rules allow, if it's safe and allowed by the procedure, to re-engage those targets that you engage in the open. So again, I can shoot my 6 rounds, stop at P2. If I wanted to, apparently, I could reload, do a tack load. I could fire 9 rounds at T1 as I back up so that my gun is empty when I arrive at P2, do a reload. Then continue advancing towards P3, engaging T2 and T3 on the way. If I have 11 rounds in my gun, shooting an ESP or SSP, probably impractical to fire 11 rounds as you're moving 15 feet, backing up away from T1. So as you round the corner at P2, you might just want to keep on moving. You've got 5 rounds in your gun to engage T2 and T3 with 2 each on the way to P4. Now the problem with that, those latter 2 examples, is that the rules, if you're engaging on the move from a position in the open, you can't be required to shoot more than 6 rounds before arriving at the next shooting position. So all is well when you arrive at P2, except that you don't shoot anything from P2. P2 is cover, specified as cover in the procedure, but because you don't engage anything from P2 necessarily, the next shooting position would be P3 unless you chose to re-engage T1 from P2. So the discussion revolved around, on match day, I hadn't seen the stages until it was actually set up. If I back up and shoot my 6 rounds and I'm empty and I stop at P2 with my revolver and do a reload, am I allowed to stop at P2 and do a reload because it's not the next shooting position? Now, what if I were to stop there, do my empty gun emergency reload, and then fire another round, a 7th round at T1 to establish P2 as a shooting position. So essentially retroactively making it a legal place to reload. It becomes the next shooting position after I've fired a shot from it. Now, if I don't stop there at all, is my advancement from P1 directly to P3, firing 9 shots or 10 shots or 11 shots on the way, does that violate the rule that says you can't have a procedure that requires more than 6 shots in the open? Or because this P2 allows you to stop if you want to reload, you're not required to shoot 10, you're only required to shoot the 6 that you fired at T1, then you're allowed to reload. Now, must you reload after 6? Or because the procedure doesn't require you to shoot more than 6, you can go ahead and shoot your 9, 10, or 11 rounds between P1 and P3 and just ignore P2. And so there was a lot of discussion about, is this a legal stage? What can we do to it if it's not, to make it a legal stage? And it revolved mostly around the position 2 as a cover position. And one of the safety officers argued it's defined in the procedure. It says right in there that P2 is cover. And so if you have to reload at cover, you can reload at P2. And then my argument was, well, why is it cover? How does it become cover? The only target that you've engaged so far is T1. Everybody will have completed the engagement of it when they arrive at P2, and there's no other targets that are to be engaged from P2. So how is it cover? I'm not going to fire any shots, so it's not the next shooting position. And so then there was the discussion of, well, is it cover or not? And what came up was, well, if I'm standing here and I can't see any threats around either side of the barricade that need to be engaged, I'm at cover. Essentially, anywhere I am that I can't see threats, I'm at cover. Well, if you've watched prior episodes, you know that the new rule book kind of puts some different wrinkles on the definition of cover. And my contention is it's not the absence of threat targets that creates cover, it's the presence of threat targets that creates cover. Because if you are at a position where you can engage targets, you're at cover. If you're moving between 2 positions and there are no targets to engage, you're in the open. So my contention is when you pass by P2, you're in the open. You're not at cover because there are no targets to engage. Now, as an example of that, I drew up a couple of stage designs, very simple stage designs with 2 walls, 1 target, 2 shooting positions. Now, the first one shows P1 as the left edge of a wall, and then P2 is the left edge of the wall that's downrange, with T1 on the far side of P2. Now, if the walls are offset in such a way that you're moving essentially diagonally towards the corner of P2, and you're unable to engage T1 until you've arrived at that spot labeled P2 on the diagram, you're moving in the open. You can't leave P1 with an unloaded gun. You can't reload as you move between P1 and P2 because you're in the open as you go. You're covered on one side, only the downrange side. You're in the open, so that movement is in the open until you've arrived at the spot labeled P2 on the diagram, and then you can engage T1. And you're not at cover until you've arrived at that spot from which to engage T1. Now, the other diagram shows the 2 walls offset in the other way, so that as you're advancing from P1 to P2, the target is visible to you and so engageable as you advance. Cover now extends to the limits of the stage boundaries. So if you drew a line through T1, the center of the down 0 zone on T1, past that line through the edge of the cover at P2, it would run all the way up range behind the shooter's back as they're shooting at P1 at whatever is available from P1. Now, as they peer around the corner and look downrange towards P2, there are no targets to engage. And so the act of leaving P1 is leaving cover. So if you have an empty gun and you want to move downrange to P2, you cannot leave that spot until you've completed your reload. But because of the way the walls are oriented and the location of the target, as soon as you step out from P1, you're just going to take a step to your left, essentially, to get around the edge of the wall and head downrange. Now T1 is visible and it's available. So essentially, you're at P1 while you're there at the edge of the wall shooting or doing your reload. But as soon as you've stepped out and can see T1, now you are at the cover of P2. P2 is not the spot on the ground that it was in the previous stage. P2 is now the edge of that wall, and you can stand or move anywhere along that line that runs from the center of T1 through the edge of P2 and on up range to the stage boundaries. So I can't reload, I can't leave P1 with an empty gun because that would be leaving cover with an empty gun. But as soon as I've stepped out, if I have a round in my gun, I can, as I advance towards P2, I can do a moving tactical reload. I can fire a shot at T1 and then perform a slide lock reload, because I have 15 or 20 feet to move to get from P1 to P2. And as long as I'm moving on that line, the target is available and I am at cover. One of the things that I've tried to emphasize to the stage designers at my club is that there's no requirement that you go to cover, to use it as cover. So while in the first diagram, you actually do physically have to go to P2 to be in position to engage T1, in the second example, as soon as you can see T1, you're free to engage, you're free to move, you're free to reload, as long as you're on that line. And so cover, although you have a cover position, P2, that's consistent for both stages because it's the left edge of that wall that you will be using as cover, your shooting position could possibly be very different. In the first example, your shooting position is going to be right there on that spot marked P2, but your shooting position on the other stage could be anywhere along that line. But you are at cover even though you're 20 feet from the wall because the target is available. Now, if you came out, saw that target and thought, oh geez, I don't want to be exposed to that target, I'm going to take a step to the right so that I'm covered by it. Now you're in the open. You were covered before when you can see it. Now that you can't see it anymore, you're moving in the open. And so it's kind of a different way of thinking. I talked about this kind of extensively in an earlier episode, but it's just a different way of looking at what is cover and how it is enforced. And so this idea that was a popular idea, popular theory, that because I can't see any targets, I'm behind cover, it's actually the opposite of that. Not until I can see targets am I behind cover. So chew on that a little bit. So what was the decision on the stage that we shot last Saturday? My suggestion before we shot the match, when we were doing the staff walkthrough, was move the stack of barrels enough so that when you were at P2, you could see T2. Then that would create the next shooting position as P2 rather than P3. You'd fire your 6 shots as you backed up to P2. You'd engage P2 from T2. Then you would engage T3 on the way to P3, and then engage T4 from P3. So that way everything is nice and neat. Each position, P2 and P3 are both shooting positions. You will shoot there, you can reload there, and that made it nice and neat. But we decided to not make that modification and just let the chips fall where they may, allowing people to stop at P2 and reload even though they didn't engage anything. And after chewing on it for a while, I decided that wasn't the right call. I don't think that if you stop at P2, you're not at cover. You can't reload there unless you fire a shot. Then the question becomes, what if I do a reload, then fire a shot at T1 to establish this as a shooting position? Do I get a penalty for stopping in to reload and then have the penalty removed after I fire a shot? I mean, can I retroactively establish it as a shooting position? the guys who shot 9 or 11 rounds in a single string on their way from P1 to P3, is it an illegal stage because that was allowed, or is it only an illegal stage if you're required to do that? And then we get back to P2. If P2 isn't the next shooting position, then you essentially are requiring everybody to empty their gun as they move from P1 to P3. And T2 was not visible from P3. So if you say fired 6 shots at T1 and then hustled all the way over to P3, the only targets that would be available were T3 and T4. So you would end up with 2 mics on T2 because you are trying to comply with the rule that says you can't shoot more than 6 rounds in a row in a single string, single engagement, before arriving at the next shooting position. But again, is that something, a requirement that's made on the stage designer, or is that a requirement of the shooter? I'm not allowed to go more than 6 rounds without reloading, and if they've provided this place for me to reload, I'm going to reload here so I don't shoot more than 6 before going to the next shooting position. But if I don't fire a shot, I don't think it's a shooting position, and I don't think it's cover. So interesting stage. If you have suggestions, questions, let me know. It was just an interesting thing. We're still doing a debate on our club forum about it in the aftermath of the match, because my conclusion was just you can't do that. You can't just call this spot cover. The rules require that you advance to the next shooting position, and that would be P3. And so P2 can't satisfy that requirement unless you shoot a shot, maybe. So let me know what you think about that. Interesting stage. I liked it in the sense that it does make you think. It reminded me of my days of standing there trying to decide how to best shoot a USPSA stage. Where do I do my reload? You know, what's the balance of rounds here? Will I arrive at the next position with enough rounds to complete the engagement? And so it was kind of fun just sitting there thinking about it, kind of sleuthing it out. What if I had 8 rounds? What if I had 9? What if I have 11? What if I have 6? But then the problem you get is the safety officer really doesn't know what to expect. If the shooter stops and reloads, are they supposed to do a slide lock reload? Are they supposed to do a tack load? Are they not allowed to do a reload at all? And then when they're moving to the next target, and then there's even some question about the 2 targets that you engaged on the move. As you're moving from left to right, the target that's numbered T3 on the diagram appears first. So people were asking, well, do I have to engage T3 first, or can I engage T2 first? And I think the difference in the distance was such that it didn't matter. You would engage the target that you saw first. But then what happens if the shooter took another step, didn't engage the one that they saw first, ran past the vision barrier, and engaged the second one first? Is that violating tactical priority because the other one was available and they ignored it to go to the second, what I would call the second target? Or because they're within 6 feet of being the same distance, you can shoot whichever one you want? And then, of course, when you're moving, your relationships of the 2 targets is changing the whole time. Even though T3 appears initially first, if you take 2 or 3 more steps, it's more nearly like a triangle with you at the base and the 2 targets at the top, and then you kind of have your choice. So can you wait until the targets are exactly equal distance, or do you shoot that first one because it appears first? Then you arrive at T3. Most people then fired 1 or 2 shots as necessary at T3 to complete the engagement that they were unable to complete because they ran out of ammo, and then they would fire the 2 shots at T4. The guys who were in ESP and SSP would have fired 11 rounds on the way. They arrived at cover, put a last shot on T4 to complete the course of fire. So let me know what you think of that. It was kind of an interesting stage. I know how I looked at it, but let me know what you think.